Laws of logic, another precondition of intelligibility. Let's look at this second precondition of knowledge that only the Bible provides, laws of logic. This image on the slide shows the three most basic laws of logic. One, the law of identity. Something is what it is and isn't what it isn't. Two, the law of non-contradiction. Two opposite statements can't both be true at the same time and or in the same way. And three, the law of the excluded middle. Something's either true or false. There's no middle ground. The laws of logic demonstrate the ultimate proof of creation. As Jason Lau points out, the existence of the laws of logic, which are prerequisites for all knowledge, have no basis in the evolutionary worldview. From the Bible, we get the answer, the reason, for why there are consistent laws of logic. Only the Bible provides the basis, the preconditions for logic. Because God is perfectly logical, as we read in Scripture, He does not lie. He says in His Word it's impossible for God to lie. He always tells the truth. Because of this, God always abides by these three basic laws of logic, and in fact, God is the basis for the existence of these three basic laws of logic and all their corollaries, all the consequent laws based upon them. God, one, calls a spade, the law of identity. He doesn't say a spade is also a pitchfork, which would be a contradiction. And He doesn't say there is a third option that you can call it whatever you want, the excluded middle, whatever you want it to be. So, for example, consider what the Lord through His Apostle Paul says about salvation in Romans 11, verse 6. There we read, "And if by grace, then is it no more of works? Otherwise grace is no more grace. But if it be of works, then it is no more grace. Otherwise work is no more work." So there's a great and clear example with the relationship between grace and works of the laws of logic and that God perfectly keeps them. Salvation is by grace alone, not works, and there can be no mixture of the two. The law of identity, grace is grace while work is work. The law of non-contradiction, salvation is not by grace or work, it's one or the other, and God says it's by grace, not work. And the law of the excluded middle, which the institutional church hates today, they've wandered so far from the truth. There is no middle ground. Salvation is not by grace plus works today, as the fleshly legalists, the modern-day Pharisees that run the institutional church claim. There's no mixing of grace and works together, as Apostle Paul makes plain here, as God makes plain. God is perfectly logical, unlike fallen, fallible man, or Christians who are resisting the Spirit. The always truthful God created and upholds the universe and created humanity in His image, like Himself, within limits, with the expectation that we would be like Him. Adam's and our sin has corrupted our ability to reflect God's image, so our thoughts are not His thoughts. However, Adam's race, still bearing God's image, is expected to be truthful, to be honest, which is another way of saying that we are to be logical, like God. For our purposes, this is enough to tell us that God is the source of, the reason for the existence of logic. The Bible alone provides the precondition of logic that makes everything intelligible. By contrast, evolution has no reason. It offers no precondition for logic, no explanation or basis for the existence of the laws of logic. Logic is immaterial. It has no natural basis in the physical world. The physical world is logical and orderly. It's discoverable and understandable because its creator, in reflection of His nature, created and upholds the universe in a logical and orderly manner. The biblical God, Jesus Christ, is the precondition for the preconditions of intelligibility. For example, contradictions cannot occur in reality. I can't be both physically here and somewhere else at the same time in God's universe. So the material universe abides by, obeys these logical principles. It's one way in which the universe declares the reality that the Creator God exists, just as He says in His book, the Bible. As Jason Lau writes, laws of logic are God's standard for thinking. Since God is an unchanging, sovereign, immaterial being, His thoughts would necessarily be abstract, universal, invariant entities. In other words, says Lyle, they are not made of matter. They apply everywhere and at all times. Laws of logic are contingent upon God's unchanging nature, and they are prerequisite for logical reasoning. Thus, rational reasoning would be impossible without the biblical God. Only the biblical Christian worldview, only the Bible, based on Genesis 1 to 11, its first 11 chapters, can explain the existence of logic and therefore our ability to know. An evolutionist can reason logically, like all human beings, to some extent, and unlike all animals, by the way, But the evolutionist, based on his or her own worldview, cannot explain why he or she is able to reason logically. The why question for reality, for you and me, for everything, is only answered by the Bible, by biblical creation, by our Creator. The purpose, the meaning, the reason why is only explained in God's unique, infallible word, the Bible. In an accidental evolutionary universe, says Lyle, why would there be universal, unchanging standards? No explanation provided in the evolutionary worldview. Since the God of Scripture is immaterial, says Lyle, since he is sovereign and beyond time, it makes sense to have laws of logic that are immaterial, universal, and unchanging. Since God has revealed himself to man, we are able to know and use logic. Since God made the universe, and since God made our minds, it makes sense that our minds would have an ability to study and understand the universe. But, says Lyle, if the universe and our minds are simply the results of time and chance, as the evolutionists contend, why would we expect that the mind could make sense of the universe? How could science and technology be possible? No explanation is provided by the evolutionary worldview.